Well, folks, in today's video, we're going to be installing this Digitrax decoder on this 1951 Hiawatha. This was my grandmother's Hiawatha that she got as a child, and up until a couple years ago, this thing did not run whatsoever. So over the last 5 years, I've slowly been rebuilding it, and that project's generally been very successful. We got this thing from a locomotive that didn't work whatsoever to a runner. Unfortunately, by the time I got to this thing, the wiring inside of it was long gone, so I kind of jerry-rigged it with all sorts of random wires that go all around the body, and it works, but it's not very good. So I decided yesterday, hey, why don't we modernize this thing, and if we're going to be redoing the wiring, let's give her a DCC, and, you know, make this a locomotive that meets modern standards. I've already done a tiny bit of that work. You can see right here I replaced the standard coupler that came on this thing with a nice knuckle coupler, and I just basically just took out the little rivet that held the original coupler in, and just put a little nut and bolt to hold that on. So I can always put this back in if I need to, but for my purposes, knuckle coupler should be fine. But as for the locomotive, you know, it's basically completely stripped of its wiring at the moment. I've already taken out the little brushings for the motor, as you need to take those out to lift off the shell. But we still have got plenty of work to do, so I guess let's get around to that and get this to be a modern locomotive that can operate, hopefully, with DCC. Begin by removing the shell. Now that we're in here, you can kind of see the wiring I did. This wire needs to go. I kind of ran it basically kind of under the weight, and it would go under the motor up through the shell and to here to provide power for the light to work, because basically the way this works is this whole body is either charged with a positive or negative current, and the tender picks up the opposite of that, so they have to be kept separate. Let me find my clippers so we can actually cut this wire. So we're going to cut this wire. We could cut it closer to the fixture, but it really wouldn't be necessary because we need to obviously connect a new wire to this. And this is not a bad place to put electrical tape, solder, etc., because there's a lot of space right here that's not being used. So we can take that. We're also going to cut this black wire right here. This just picks up power directly from the body. But it has nothing to do with the contacts. Again, the whole body is charged with a type of power, so we're going to just cut that, and we're going to also wire it up with magnet wire, because with a DCC decoder, it basically requires that you have both leads actually going to the decoder. And there we go. So we've got that done. And as for the decoder, I've already removed all the unnecessary wires. I'm not sure what this green and violet one were for, but I've removed them, and then I also removed the yellow wire, which is for the reversing light. This locomotive doesn't have one, it only has a headlight, so I just removed that. I used to cut them right down to the stub, but I've decided to leave a little bit. That way, if I ever want to use this decoder on something else in the future, or add something, I've got those wires available. We're also going to cut off this 8-pin socket, because as you'd probably guess, this thing's not DCC ready, surprisingly. So yeah, anyways, we've got all of our wires. We've got the, okay, so it's the black and red wires. Those both go to the track. So we're going to have one that will be wired into the tender, one that will be wired into the locomotive's power system, which we can actually obtain power right thereabouts. I believe it's the gray, yeah, it's the gray and orange wire. Those both go to the motor, so they'll be going to these tabs right here. And these last two, the blue is the common wire for the lighting. So if we had a reversing light, we'd wire them, both the forward and reversing light, into this one wire, but we only need the two. So that's all of our wiring. Fortunately, this means we're gonna have to run a lot of wires from the tender, but it's all part of the job, I guess. Alright, we're gonna open up the... Okay, I guess it's good we're opening up the tender, because that truck just let go. The thing you gotta love about these old Rivarossis, these parts are very easy to work on. Just 4 screws holding it in. And once you undo them, the whole thing pops out. And you gain access to the inside. And there's really not much on the inside, which is excellent, because that gives us plenty of room to put our decoder, etc. We could probably even put sound in this thing if we wanted to. I'm not sure how great the sound quality would be, because there's no holes in it. I don't want to go drilling holes in the bottom of this tender, but there's enough space that you could put a decoder if you were willing to. Jeopardize the sound quality a little. I'm just going to gently lift it out. And there we go. We're now on the inside. You can see what I did here, by the way. This is actually how I wired it up. There used to be a wire that would plug in here, but I didn't have it. At least I don't remember having it. Anyways, we're going to remove that and replace it with something much more better. Alright, I've got the decoder in, and I've funneled through most of the necessary wires through the original little spot where the wire used to plug in. Not all these wires are necessarily going to go through here, though. This one's going to be wired in to the tender, and then these ones are for the light, so we'll wire those ones up later. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to try to loosen this nut, basically, and then what we'll do is we're going to shove the end of the black wire under the nut, and then we're going to tighten it down, and then that will clamp the wire in place, because soldering into this, it's just such a big object. You can't really get the solder to flood properly, I find, so we'll just do this. And provided we do this tight enough, we shouldn't have any problems. Furthermore, if it becomes loose enough to let the wire go, it probably means it needed to be tightened up anyways, because you don't want this truck randomly falling off if you're moving it somewhere. And there we go. Fortunately, I made all these come back out, but it won't be that hard to get them back in. Now, the reason I have not brought these two wires through here is because I want to wire the same wires that are going to go through the locomotive itself to the fixture. And for this application, we're going to be using Magnum Wire, which is basically a type of wire covered in a very thin insulation. It's like as big as a thread, and honestly, it will be perfect for this application because all it needs to power is this little light. So we'll wire it up through this, and then we can just run these, I don't know, under this weight or something. We'll figure it out. Alright, so the wires now go up from here, under the weight, through here, through the motor, because I'm a rebel, and out here where they'll connect to the tender. Now, this is a little bit of a shady application for Magnum Wire, so we're just going to make sure that this whole setup actually, in fact, works. It's so hard to see the wires. Yep. Hey, you see that? Just a little light there? Works. Now, here's an interesting problem. You see, this tab right here brings power, which comes up through here. It touches the motor, because the whole thing, just like I said earlier, is charged with one current, and brings it to the tab. Now, when you install a DCC decoder, the locomotive has to be completely isolated from the frame. So when we remove this, it actually becomes isolated. But, to make things even better, this red wire needs to be connected to one of the grounds. And since this provides power, we can wire something directly into this screw and pick up power. We have to obviously remove this piece, so we're going to unscrew it. I'm going to hold this very tight because you've got washers which isolate the motor's frame, which need to be kept in place, and if it becomes too loose, there's always a chance the bearings might fall out. And if you've ever changed the bearings on a Rivarossi motor, you'll know exactly why you do not want them to fall out. So let's get that through, and that should be tight enough for us to do our wiring in a sec. Alright, we're going to shove this big cluster of wires through there. Alright. Now, to start wiring this all up is where things get a little bit more tricky, because we obviously need to wire it through the shell because there's no gap there, so that will be fun. Yeah, I might put some extenders on some of these wires just to make life a bit easier. Otherwise, this is just going to be really tricky. I believe this came out of my Tyco Chattanooga, aka the gift that keeps on giving. I'm pretty sure this might be good to wire around there, and it happens to be the same color of wire too, so sort of a double win on that. So we'll solder, or not solder, we'll just clip this thing in around that screw. Yeah, it might fit. Yeah, sort of. Okay, we're just gonna bring this around to the bottom here. Look at that. It's like a perfect little clip there. And we'll be able to run this through the tender, so we can actually clip this inside there, so it will work out great. Alright, we're gonna put the shell on, which means we have to run all these wires through here. Now, to wire the two terminals that go to the motor, it would create a bit of an interesting problem because we need to somehow connect these wires to these brushes. So that would be tricky, because when you turn them, it would twist the wire if you soldered it directly on there. So what I've done is I created these little brass tabs, and what we're going to do is we're going to solder a wire to the bottom of each of these. The brushings will go through this and make contact with them, and then those will make contact with the motor, allowing it to turn. So we're now going to solder each of the tabs that go to the motor to there. So we'll start by putting a little bit of flux on both the tabs themselves and the wires. I obviously created two of them. There we go. Actually, it might be a good idea to run all these wires through here first. There we go. And yeah, now we can solder those both on. And it's the gray and orange ones that go to the motor, basically. There's one. I put in one of the brushings. This should be interesting. Well, there's one. Alright, we now have everything wired up. You can see we've got the one of the track wires to go into here, this going to the tab which connects to the frame. We've got the two magnet wires which connect to both the lighting pieces, and we've got the orange and gray wires which go to the tabs on the motor. So all we have to do is put this back together and take it on a test run. Alright, we've got her all set up on the track. Now there's only one thing left to do. That's not good. So I'm not so sure what was going on with the headlight because that was wired correctly. The problem with the locomotive itself is that the little tabs I made were actually pushing up a piece in the middle and I believe causing a short circuit. So I've now shrunk those a little bit, kind of refined them, and I mean the thing runs now. Let's see, it looks like it just lost power there. So yeah, you can see it's running. You know, they may not be the original cars that went with this thing, but at least they're streamlined. Come on. Well, folks, I think I got to the root problem of why this thing hasn't been running properly. Sparky might find this kind of funny, because whenever I restore a locomotive, he's always like, oh, you don't clean the wheels. Sometimes when I have a locomotive that doesn't work very well, I give the wheels a good cleaning and it fixes it up. And honestly, I usually go to everything but the wheels, so I've been playing around with this thing trying to get it to work better, and then I looked at the wheels, and they were covered in this black gunk. I think it's oil that's been picked up and burnt. So anyways, I cleaned those, and all of a sudden a lot of the problems it was having seem to have gone away, so that's a good thing. I mean, this thing has not had its wheels cleaned since I got it running, which would have been in about 2017, so it's been a while. Anyways, we're gonna run this thing now. We've got it set to address 2. We've got the streamlined cars all attached. And there we go. See which goes first. Will the locomotive short or will the cars derail? This is the vital question. It's the cars. Well, I've disconnected those derailed cars and well, it works fine, so yeah, I guess I'm happy. I still don't know what's going on with this light. I got rid of the Magnum Wire and I replaced it with regular wire, and it still seems to be stuck in the on position. So if anybody who's quite knowledgeable with DCC knows what's going on, please let me know, because that's what I consider not normal. But other than that, I'm very happy with this locomotive. Well, folks, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm genuinely thrilled that we managed to get DCC working in this thing. I mean, it's basically a 70-year-old engine at this point, and the thought of that's just crazy. I mean, in Canada's case, our Prime Minister was Louis St. Laurent, or in America's case, your president would have been Harry Truman. And the Second World War was only over 6 years prior to this thing being constructed. I mean, it's from a different world, basically. And here it is, all these years later, working with, not only running, but working with digital command control. It's a digital engine now, and something about that just boggles my mind. I also want to give a shout out to Magnum Rails, who very generously gave me this decoder, because without it, we wouldn't have been able to upgrade this engine to DCC today. So thank you, Magnum Rails. Anyways, with that, I'm going to finish off the video. Before I go, I just want to let you guys know that I'm hopefully going to be going to Arnprior tomorrow, to the train show, which you guys might remember way back on my channel. There's a video from last year's Arnprior visit. And there should be a lot of other YouTubers you guys may recognize up there as well. So stay tuned for that, hopefully. And with that, I will finish off the video. Thanks for watching.